This is Inspiring Design, where unique innovators come together to share their knowledge, share their insight, and keep us up to date with the latest industry trends. And here's your host, Roshan Senanayake.
What's up, listeners? Welcome to Inspiring Design with Roshan Senanayake. This is where the best of the best brands, experts, change makers, and thought leaders come together to share their valuable insights, experience, and knowledge. Our goal here is to be the missing link between education, design, and the industry. So today I have here with me the director of Chaos Group Labs, Chris Nichols, joining me all the way from Los Angeles, US. Chris is an industry veteran, currently serves as the director of Chaos Group Labs. He holds a bachelor's degree from Colgate University, majoring in mathematics, art, and arts history, as well as a master's in architecture from Rice University. Chris's deep understanding of both art and science has taken him wide and varied career path. He was hired by Gensler, the largest architecture firm in the world, to focus on CG visualization. He later applied his knowledge to a long career in visual effects, which includes movies such as Maleficent, Oblivion, and Tron. In his current role, Chris finds interesting ways to bridge the gap between technical and creative CG problems in many industries, including visual effects, architecture, products, and automotive design. So without further ado, let's get straight into it. Chris, mate, welcome to Inspiring Design.
Thanks for having me.
My pleasure, mate. Can we start off with a little bit of background on yourself? What's your story?
What's my story? Well, it's long and sort of story. I guess I was always, I was an odd kid that had odd things that I liked to do. Back when I was a kid, I got into computers when the personal computer first started to become a thing, where you could actually have a computer in your house and it wasn't in a back room in your dad's office. So that was when I first started to learn how to program and just, goofing around on a computer. I got into it to some extent, quite a bit. In terms of, making games and stuff on a Commodore 64 and things of that nature. But I then sort of really became into both art and math. That was sort of two parts that I actually really loved doing. And I guess I got into that because I always thought that I was going to be an architect. Since I was about 7, I decided I was going to be an architect for some reason. And I structured my whole education around going to be an architect, even saying the fact that I'm not going to go to architecture right away. I'm going to do something else and then architecture, because that's going to make me a better architect.
Yeah.
That was the idea. So when I went to college, I went to Colgate in upstate New York. It was a small, very good liberal arts school. And I decided to, specifically do art and math, and study that. And then when I went to get my master's in Houston at Rice University, that's, I was going to do architecture there. So that was around 93.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd already gotten pretty good at doing stuff on computers, and especially visualization. I was really into the idea of visualization. I was for math, I was using a program called Mathematica, which is now pretty popular, but back then it was brand new. And I was doing it on these Next machines, which were machines that Steve Jobs founded before he went back to Apple.
Yeah.
But I did that for a little bit. And then when I went to architecture school, they happened to have these new computers there that were called SGIs, and computers they used to do Jurassic Park. And that was around the time that I came. So 93 is when I went there. So that's around the time when Jurassic Park came out. So I said, cool, I'm going to try that. And these were extremely expensive computers at the time, but universities got these great grants and big deals with these companies. So I embraced it very early on. I think no one else knew how to use this. They just had this computer there, and they said, do something. And someone just tried it, and they turned around and was like, I don't know how to learn. So I just went into it. I just stayed up late. I was the only person in the lab. And I learned all that stuff on my own, back around 93. And I became sort of more of an expert in this area, which was kind of fun, I guess. So that became sort of my focus on visualization. And then I ended up I was teaching it because I was good at it. I ended up teaching at the university.
Mm-hmm.
So I got into teaching, which was actually, I really liked teaching. That was, I know you're educators, and to me, the teaching is the best way to learn something.
Absolutely.
Because you got to know what you're saying. I think remember my first job teaching at the university, I decided I was going to teach them something about CG. And I said, okay, we're going to start with the very basics parts of CG. And remember, this is the early days of computer graphics. So I said,
Mm-hmm.
okay, we're going to learn about 3 major things: rotation, translation, scale. And so I wrote down RTS on the whiteboard. And then I turned around and I noticed everyone writing it down on their notebooks.
Yeah.
And I said, oh boy, I better know what I'm talking about, because they're writing it all down. It's like, it was kind of one of those moments. I was like, okay, I better get good at understanding this. So that education was a really good part of me getting better at what I was doing.
Yeah.
And so then when I went to Gensler, which was a big architecture firm, I ended up, they hired me there because I was really good at CG, and they needed someone in that area to do visualization work. This was before ArcViz companies were big. ArcViz companies were not sort of well known back then. There was maybe a couple. D-Box was one of them, possibly, but there isn't that many architecture viz companies. So architects would hire an expert in this area. But I happen to have an architecture degree.
You already have the understanding of space, you say you.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I went to Rice is an excellent architecture school. It's a very good design school too. So I was a good designer, but I also happen to be really good at doing CG work. And so I went to my boss basically at Gensler, and I said, I went to architecture school. I don't want to be some guy who just does renderings. Can I do more than that? And they said, well, Chris, we can hire a designer. I'm sure you're a very good designer, but we can hire lots of designers. We just can't find anyone that does what you do.
Wow.
So I was like, okay, I get it. But they were nice enough to say, okay, we'll tell you what, we'll put you on a design team because I think it's fair that you have that experience. And I said, okay. So I went on a design team, and then, it was an office space of some kind. And they started talking about, the fire ratings on the doors and the height of the handicap railings and stuff like that. And I decided, I don't know if I really care. I think I like making the pictures.
I love the honesty.
Yeah. And I said, I like making really nice pictures, and that's a cool thing to do. And so it was at that time that basically I got, at that point I had moved to Los Angeles. I was working at the Gensler office in Los Angeles, and a friend of mine was working at a company called Digital Domain.
Mm-hmm.
And indeed, they called me up and they said, "Hey, we're about to make this movie where we have to build, most of New York City for this movie called Day After Tomorrow. So can you bring some of your architecture building skills to to help us with this movie? And I said, sure. So that's how I ended up getting into the visual effects world as that.
So you were actually involved in Day After Tomorrow as well?
Oh yeah. I've been doing this for a long time.
Wow, that's incredible. That's incredible. I actually love that movie, and
Really?
simply because it was such an amazing way of actually visualization. I remember saying that to my parents back in the day. That's amazing. And now I'm speaking to one of the people that was behind.
Yeah. It was interesting. I'll tell you something that was interesting, because I remember I was complaining about in architecture. I didn't have a chance to do architecture while I was an architect, because all the other architects were doing that job. I was just sort of doing whatever they told me to do in terms of visualizing it. But when I was at DD, there was there had so many buildings that had to be built, and they didn't know how to make a building look real, or like how to design a building.
Yeah.
And so then suddenly they're like, well, Chris, you're an architect, so you tell us how it's supposed to look. So all of a sudden my first job outside of architecture, I was actually building architecture.
Yeah.
Which is kind of interesting. Like I was actually designing some of these things and and the best part is that I didn't have to worry about code. I just had to have a basic understanding of it.
Yeah.
Just so it looked right, but it was interesting. So it was fun. And yeah, a lot of the background buildings, I sort of came up with a whole system on how to do all those background buildings and all that stuff. It was pretty fun.
Wow, that's an incredible story, and I love that. And because I think everyone listening can actually relate, because these movies, they've seen it. So your work, it's so easy to actually connect with. So yeah. I admire that a lot. We had this gentleman back in season 1 I spoke with. He was an industrial designer from Marvel that had worked recently with in the new Thor movie and Godzilla. So again, but from an industrial design point of view. So it's quite interesting how these base level skills that we sometimes take for granted can create these amazing things that we enjoy on a daily basis in coming from Hollywood. So I love that. Love that.
Yeah.
So, pretty amazing story. So let's get into VRay. And
sure.
This is something that a lot of people have been talking to me about, because VRay's been widely used here as well in Australia, and a lot of firms use it and universities use it. Schools want to use it more and more. So tell me a little bit about what is VRay all about?
Sure. So actually, it's interesting. This all kind of started around 2001, and this is when I was still at Gensler, actually. And VRay was there was a new kind of thing that was going on. Now, obviously, a lot of people were using computers. They were doing CG, but computers were pretty slow back in, very much slower than they are now. And so there was something called ray tracing that was coming along. And there was a couple programs that could do it, but they were very expensive and they were slow and they were extremely complicated. But then just around that time, there were 3 packages, 3 renderers inside of 3ds Max that were plugins that were going in, and what was different from them is that they were full ray tracers. Yeah. Because then before then they had packages that were like inside of Max that were they were called a rasterized renderer, which is what real-time games, real-time renderers use now. And they would do something called ray tracing, but it was on top. So what ray tracing really does is as opposed to rasterized rendering that does a scan line and looks at the geometry and sort of does that kind of intersection. What a ray tracer does is it shoots rays of theoretical rays from the camera and interpolates how all the rays bounce around and creates something that looks really great.
Which one's more accurate, do you think?
It's much more accurate. It is the most accurate system we have now. Rasterized are not accurate at all, but they're fast. But ray tracers are much more accurate. And what's interesting is specifically for architects and architecture, it became extremely important, ray tracing did, because it was the only way that you could get truly accurate lighting with something that at the time was called global illumination. right? And what global illumination is it calculates how light bounces around on diffuse surfaces, so that light scatters everywhere. So very common, for example, if you have a white room and you have a red carpet in a room, the red carpet would reflect red light coming up on everything, right? So different colors. And it was extremely important. Architects wanted to know what their space looked like. What happens if this is a bigger window, a smaller window, how the light comes in, how much more light floods through the space. Really very, very important for lighting. And what happened was VRay became one of the fastest at doing that specific kind of ray tracing.
Yeah.
And it also did it in a way that was simpler than any of the other solutions. And it was invented by, when I first checked it out, was around that 2001. It was literally some guys in Bulgaria, two guys in Bulgaria, and they had decided, hey, I think I wrote something pretty cool. And they went up on the Delphi forum and created a download, and people could freely download this program and try it out. They really didn't have a company. Then suddenly, about 6 months later, it's like, I guess maybe we should sell this as a product. And they made VRay, and that was the first version of VRay. And I was one of the first people to buy the actual software back then. And I became close friends with those guys. And then it was interesting because when I went to the film industry, I noticed that they were like, we're never going to ray trace, it's too slow. And I'm like, really? But the architects are doing ray tracing. Why aren't you guys doing it? Yeah. So it actually took another 5-6 years before the visual effects industry started to embrace fully ray traced stuff. They did a little bit. Mental Ray was the only other package they were looking at, but then other packages started coming along. Arnold and VRay, more specifically, VRay became a big thing at that time. So I sort of became an expert in V-Ray and an expert in lighting, and that's sort of one of the things that happened to me while I was working in visual effects. And I was really interested in basically that idea, and I'm still very close. Still was very close with the company. And then the company grew and grew and grew. I mean, like I said, it was two guys. It was Vlado and Peter for many years. And now, it's all over the architecture world. It's one of the biggest renderers of all architecture. And it's all over the automotive industry as well, and the visual effects industry. And, we went from 2 people to almost 400 people in the company now. So,
wow, that's insane. That's amazing. Yeah. I love when that's it. And obviously you're creating huge value. So this is a bit of an obvious question, but I actually wanted to hear from an expert such as yourself. Why do you think this visualization is an important skill for the future of design? Doesn't really matter if it's outside of architecture, but why is it important?
Well, I mean, you always want to see what it's going to look like before it's built, right? So that's an important part of it. So you do have many opportunities to look at it in different ways, spatial, et cetera, et cetera. But just light is an important part. I mean, V-Ray is really, if you think about it, it's a camera. It's a camera into a space that hasn't been built yet. And that becomes much more important to see what things really look like. So I think ray tracing is going to be more and more important. These days, people are very interested in real-time rendering. And they should be. That's because that is the future. The future is real time, but the future is not rasterized. The future is ray traced. So when we're talking about ray tracing or real time, what you should be thinking about is real time ray tracing, and not ray trace. Remember, I was talking about before where they would do rasterization and ray tracing on top. I'm talking about full ray tracing, like everything is ray traced. And when you start doing that, then you've pretty much recreated, visually speaking, you've recreated the real world. So that's what's important right now about that.
That's awesome. I love that. And how do people coming up in these industries, how do they harness these skills? Like, I know you were lucky with literally activating your left and right brain, arts and maths, bringing that together. So you had that training. How can people harness these skills from an early age, especially if they know that they're going to be using these in multiple industries? How can they harness it?
Well, what's interesting to me is that I've been doing this for with almost 30 years, right? So the thing is, it never was. It always started way more complicated than it was, right? So the trend is now actually things get simpler and simpler and simpler.
Yeah.
And one of the things that was interesting is when people were starting to look at VRay in the early days, like, it's too simple. It's like, or some people say it's really simple. VRay is really simple. And what's interesting now is that the world has changed so much that VRay, suddenly people are like, it's really complicated. I'm like, it hasn't changed. In fact, it's gotten simpler. It's just that people want the one button solution, right? Yeah. And that's fine. We have that one button solution. The thing that's important is what you really need to do is if to pick up the skill. I say the best way to pick up the skill so that it becomes easier to do is to pick up photography, honestly speaking, right? If you're good at photography, then you're going to understand this. And you don't have to get into all the details of f-stops and stuff like that of photography. What you really need to get good at is composition, lighting, things of that nature, right? If you want to make something look good, look at how you do a photograph and understand some of the fundamentals of photography, 3-point lighting, those skills. Those are skills that doesn't matter. The technology is not going to do that for you. You still have to do that no matter what. They're not going to compose an image for you perfectly without you doing anything. I think that needs to come from the inner person. So those are the skills that I think are the most important. I try not to teach.
I think referring to training that eye, because I think you said it very eloquently, you know, it's a camera into a space that hasn't been built yet. So if you can train your eye, then everything else falls through. I love that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So that's the most important part of things. And then on the next level is just sort of realize, like, okay, here's the thing also, don't be intimidated by the giant interface and don't pretend that you know what's going on. I've been using these programs forever. And what I always love to do is just go back to default settings on everything and not twiddle in all the settings. And all those settings are there on an as needed basis, but I'll guarantee you that 99% of the time you do not need to mess with them. Yeah. And that sort of becomes very liberating, because then you're like, okay, well then that just works. One more skill I think that actually is very important to understand for lighting or for rendering. There's 3 parts to lighting that are rendering things that are important to learn. One is, obviously, you mentioned the cameras. The second is the lighting. How do you put the lighting and what kind of lighting you have? Those are things to understand, those parts of things. And then the third one, which is a little bit odd, and this is really only in the computer graphics world, is materials. Materials have a very specific kind of property that are important to sort of understand that. And that is one of the more challenging things to learn, is, you know, how things need to look like, what is a reflection, and what is an index of refraction. That sounds very intimidating as a term, but it is an important part of physics, of how light reflects off of things, and how shiny things are. And those are good things to learn. And because they're a challenge, and I know people, like, for example, especially people that are not necessarily hardcore into computer graphics, some people that are doing great computer graphics, like in SketchUp, for example, they don't have it memorized, you know, what the index of refraction of water is, right? I do, unfortunately, but so what we do for those situations, we have libraries. We have a library that's like, okay, so you want water, here's basic water. Now, once you have water, it'd be good for you to know a little bit about what those settings are, so that you can change things in case you want to do things, in case you want to, you know, make the water colored red or colored blue or whatever you want to do. Or if you want to tint your glass and you want to know where to tint your glass, like what's the best way to do it. Those are skills that I think that you can learn as you go. But yeah, those are materials is going to be the one thing that takes a little bit more time getting there. But those are going to be great as well to learn.
Yeah,
Like
I'll look.
start with lighting. It's lighting and cameras. If you do those two, and then you just use white materials for everything, you're going to get like really far.
That's great because it makes sense because the level of physics and level of science, you know, a little bit of chemistry, a little bit of physics understandings, and combined with mathematics, then you're bringing in some creativity into it, training your eye. It makes sense, and you've outlined that perfectly, man. And so I know recently you were really busy the last few weeks simply because VRay 5 just came out. And
Yep.
I've been getting the ads everywhere, and I've seen it. I've passed it onto my students as well. So tell us what's different in VRay 5 compared. What's the new stuff?
Well, we've done. It's interesting. This version of VRay, we've put in a lot of things specifically to help go through iterations faster. Because a lot of times when, you know, especially in the old days of rendering, it's like make a change and then let it render, see what's happening, make a change, let it render, see what's happening. I remember, so I had I'll get a little side story if that's okay. There's a friend of mine when I was working on iRobot, and he was the VFX supervisor on the show. And he was a practical guy. So he used to do practical miniatures and everything. And he said, I really want to know how you guys light in your rendering. And I showed him how we do it, where we like move the light in Maya at the time, move the light around, and then hit render and wait, and then see the effects of that, and then move the light again and then wait. And he says, that would be like me going on set and moving the light around, turning all the lights off, moving them around, waiting half an hour, turning them on, seeing what happened, then saying, no, that's not right, turning them all off again. It's like, that's not practical. It's like, nope, it's not. And so what we're doing now is we're allowing things to move along, iterate faster in terms of in interactive ways. One of the things we've added is we've completely changed what's called our virtual frame buffer, which is really the window into the rendering that you've done. There's a lot of things we've done in the frame buffer to make it, you know, much nicer and easier to use. But one of the things that everyone's been very excited about is we've incorporated a new feature that's actually borrowed from another renderer that we do called Corona. We actually use both of Chaos Group owns both of those products.
Was it prior to the pandemic?
It wasn't Corona before, yeah. It was named Corona for a long time, yeah. But but anyway, this is the feature is called the light mixer, and what's really interesting about the light mixer, and actually something that's true of ray tracing in general, is because everything is like a ray. Like I mentioned, they're all rays that are scattered everyone. We still know where every ray hit and what contribution they have had to every pixel in the scene. So it's all in memory when after you've done the rendering. So what happens with the light mixer is that after you've done all the rendering, it'll list all the lights that you have in your scene on the side. And because it knows what that specific light has contributed to the image, you can change the intensity of that light and it'll dim just those sections of the pixels that have affected that. Or you can change the color of that light, or you can do all kinds of things. So basically it's kind of like you're on an engineer at a theater where you're the light mixer in a theater where you can make the light blue, turn it down, put the spotlight on, etc. That's basically what you have. And what's really great about that is that you can do your rendering, you can get the lighting about where you want it, but then if you want to change the balance of lighting, you can do that all after the fact, which is kind of a great tool, and really a kind of awesome because you can see it happening in real time.
Yeah.
So that's a really cool feature that we've added. We've added other things that have been really great to sort of help, especially architects and things of that nature. Some randomizer is what we were calling it. Where if you want to randomize a bunch of different textures on different things, you can randomize the textures that way. We've added for people, this is more for the film industry, but you know, possibly the architects could be interested. The ASIS CG workflow, that's for matching colors of specific types of cameras like Red cameras and Alexa cameras and things of that nature. We've added, oh my gosh, so many things. Oh, a new sun and sky system, which is great. I love it.
People definitely love that.
Yeah. So the sun and sky, we've added a new, basically it's based on a new, some new research that's happened, but Sun and skies, there's simulators out there that can tell you basically you position the sun based on the angle of your scene, and you tell it the nature of the sky that you have, how much turbidity, which is how much dust is in the air, or how much ozone or moisture, different things of that nature. And then when you move the sun up and down, it'll brighten or darken the scene, and the light, the color and intensity of the sun will match what it needs to be. But with the new one, we've actually got it so the low angles are way more accurate. So you can actually get true sunsets, and you can actually get lighting that's below the horizon, which is not easy to achieve in other sky models. So that's a really great new feature that's been added, and I like that one. It's pretty.
Yeah, oh, definitely. I can imagine, because whenever we are photographing a space, usually we look for the dusk or the dawn settings, just because we're not going to get that harsh light. We're going to get the right amount of glow. And even we've explored a Matterport technology where, the 360 cameras and actually 3D mapping a space. So when you're doing that, we never go in the middle of the day when it's harsh sun. We actually prefer it when it's slightly overcast. It gives us that perfect lit setting. So I think that's, if we can achieve that on a computer, that's perfect.
Yeah, it's really kind of cool. So we've done a lot of work in sort of in that area. Another big thing that we've done is we have another product that we have currently that's in beta, and it's called Lavina. That's its current name. I think it'll probably have when it's an official product, it'll probably have a different name, but it's its current code name. It's the Bulgarian word for avalanche, which is kind of interesting. But it is our first fully ray traced real-time render. So it's basically a real-time render, but it's fully ray traced. And so what's cool about it is that all you need to do to load a Lavina scene is export out what's called a VR scene file, which is a scene file that takes all the VRay stuff and puts it into one file that you can render it in standalone. All you have to do is export that, and then you can load that in Lavina, and you can walk around in real time. So that's been a really big thing for us. And as that started to become, we started to realize what people are doing, we've sort of upped the capabilities of what's possible inside of VRay in your other applications, like if you're in Max or in SketchUp or in Maya or whatever. So you're exporting out of VR scene file has become a little bit more robust and to be able to take advantage of some of the Lavina things as well. So that's been a big thing as well.
That's an absolute game changer, because if architects can actually do that very successfully and quite easily, that client role, the communication between the client, it's just going to skyrocket. That's amazing. I love it.
Yeah, absolutely. No, they're gonna. It's Lavina is a big deal because it is fully ray traced and allows you to see things in a different way. So, and we have some really great partners who have been testing it out and doing a pretty good job on it.
Matt, I know you mentioned iRobot a few minutes ago, and I've been kind of dying to ask this question. Did you actually get to meet Will Smith?
I did not meet Will Smith, but I did meet Alan Tudyk.
Okay.
And Alex Proyas, I believe, is Australian, who's the director of.
Yep.
So I met him several times. But yeah, I did meet Alan because we were. That was after I did Day After Tomorrow, when I was doing iRobot, I sort of got into lighting of characters and doing more character lighting and that type of thing, and that sort of became one of the things I became very, very interested in. And led to my long passion on digital humans that I've had since then. So I've actually done a bunch of things on digital humans since then. So I tend to put my hands in many different kinds of jars of CG.
Yeah, definitely. And the beauty of it is because I've been teaching architecture for probably this is the 8th year now. And compared to when I was in first year, which was in 2008, the quality of work that students are producing, simply because of the capabilities of VRay and softwares like that, it's just absolutely insane. So everyone, it's just taking human capability to another level. So you're doing amazing work, mate. It's making a big impact.
Well, thank you so much.
So tell us a little bit of a gossip and a sneak peek into the future. What can we expect with the future of VRay?
Well, there's going to be, I mean, I've sort of been hinting at it before. The real time is the thing, right? So real time is how you're going to get there. What that means is what's going to be interesting right now. There's the key is what's happening in the real time world is obviously what's interesting is that the video game world has started to infiltrate the non-video game world, right? So things like Epic from Unreal from Epic and Unity, those were platforms that were built specifically to build games, right? Because games required real-time rendering. But then when they started to realize that they can do other things, they started to get into those worlds as well. What I find interesting is that those packages, especially like Unreal and Unity, they do have a rendering capability in them, and they're decent renderers, they're good renderers. But that's not what makes them interesting to me. What makes them interesting to me is that they are actually platforms that you can create things.
Mm-hmm.
So if you start to think about rendering, there are other ways you can render, right? Like SketchUp had a renderer, but VRay is a better renderer, right?
Yeah.
So they add VRay so that it can get to the next level of rendering. And the same thing is going to be true for these other platforms. And that's what I really think is interesting is, what does it mean now that things are real time, now that things are going into that area, what does that actually mean in terms of what you're able to do as an architect? If you can see your building at fully high quality from the first time you drop a polygon in your scene, right? What does that really mean towards your design process? Because I mean, the architects are always like, never make it look real because then it looks like it's done. Well, it's like, you know what? People are going to expect it to look 100% real from now on, because that's the way everything is going to look. So just embrace that. I had a conversation with Patrick Schumacher. Do you know who Patrick Schumacher is? He's the main, he's the principal behind Zaha Hadid architecture, because fortunately Zaha Hadid, she has passed away. But Patrick Schumacher was basically saying that he prefers photorealism as soon as the design is done, because let's not lie and pretend it's just, some pastel drawing that doesn't look real. Like, it's going to eventually look real. Because that's what architect is. So I think that's the thing that's going to be interesting. When things look 100% real from the first moment you do it, then it's going to change the way you think about design process. And also interactivity, right? If things are very interactive, you're going to iterate much faster. You're not going to sit there and wait for the rendering to be done and say, well, I wish it looked a little better, but it looks fine.
Yeah.
There's no more good enough. Like, you keep going and going and going until it is perfect. And I think that's going to be very interesting as well.
Absolutely. And I'm very excited about how these kinds of technologies are merging with VR, and that's an absolutely, industry disruption type mechanism, because you can literally walk through the space that hasn't been built, and if it's looking more realistic than ever before, it's actually going to take people into a world that doesn't exist anymore, but will exist. And you're right there, and you can see everything. It's amazing. The capability is insane.
I think what's interesting about VR, that's actually good you brought it up, because like there was, the VR was a big craze and everyone thought it was going to change everything. It was like the segue, like when I was like, it's going to change automotive industry forever. And the segue never actually did anything, right? But the thing is, like, VR, they had these big promises and ideas, and all the movies were going to be done in VR. And it's like, it just didn't make any sense to me. But what VR is actually excellent at doing is to take you to a place that doesn't exist. And that's what an architect has to do every day, right? They have to take you to a place that doesn't exist. And that's something that's very important as a narrative. And I think that's something that we should embrace in terms of its abilities to what you can do in architecture. So we've been focused on VR, and try to give tools that enable that to happen. And that will be sort of an important part of where things are going. But really, it's what people want to do. I mean, I've talked to a lot of architects, and there are people out there that definitely still use VR, but there's some people who just don't want to put something on their face right now, you know? So,
True. Absolutely.
so,
Yeah.
so that's something that's going to be different, but it still doesn't change the interactive real-time abilities that you have and what that's going to mean for us.
Awesome. I love it. And I always ask this from every one of the guests that I have on. What's your advice for the professionals in the industry right now? And what can they do to stay up to date, as well as students and graduates who are working their way up, who's going to be in the industry in the next 5 to 10 years? What's your advice for them?
Well, you know, just especially, I always like to keep my education to say I'm still learning. You know, I'm almost 50 and I'm still learning every day.
Lifelong.
So the best thing I got out of because I went to an architecture school, right? And I'm not an architect. I just don't practice anymore. But I still value that education a great deal, because the best thing I learned from that architecture from education is that I learned how to learn. Right. And when you learn how to learn, then everything else you learn will become easier because you know how to learn something. Right. And then teaching is another thing that by teaching, you learn that process as well. So I would say try to embrace what you learn, and then, you know, and make sure that you can take full advantage of it. The other thing I learned, you know, a little bit later in college is that the teacher don't work for the teachers work for you. You're paying the teachers to teach you. So if they're not, if you're not taking advantage of that well enough, then you're wasting your money.
Yeah.
So make sure that you use your teachers. And if you're not understanding something, it's not always your fault. It may be that you didn't understand it, and go to the teacher and ask them to help you with that, because that's their job. So
Yeah.
take advantage of your teachers, and in that way, remember you're paying them to teach you.
Absolutely. And I think that's wise words, mate. And the fact that you frame the learning in architecture resonates with me 100%. I used to be in the industry. I just don't have 30 years of experience yet,
Yeah.
but absolutely the same thing has gone through my mind, where people have literally asked me going, oh, you're not in architecture anymore. Do you think that it's a waste of your time studying that for 5 years?
Oh no.
Absolutely not. The thinking, the design thinking, the approach to any type of problem solving, and creating nothing out of something out of nothing, all of
Right.
those things were taught in architecture. So I love that.
There's also, I mean, there's a lot of other great skill sets that I got out of architecture. One is having a thick skin.
Yes, 100%.
Someone can tear your design apart and you have to be perfectly okay with that, you know? So that is a good thing, being able to understand criticism and improve on yourself on that. Being able to throw everything you've done away and be okay with that and start over, that's also something that's a good thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, I learned all those skills in architecture school, and they're still valuable to me today. You know, no matter what I'm doing, if I'm writing an email, I'm able to use that skill set. You know.
Definitely, man, definitely, and I love that, and I couldn't have said it better myself. So, what's your advice for schools and universities? You know, how can they prepare their students for using tools like this and the future of this kind of technology?
Well, the thing is, I always thought, you know, what's important for schools or for any teacher is not to focus too much on what buttons do what in any piece of software, because that's not, those buttons will change all the time. So focus on the fundamentals about it, you know, translate things into different ways of, so people can make the translation. I think when I first started teaching, I was teaching Max and Maya at the same time for the same class. It's like, you should do a Max class and a Maya class. Like, no, I'll do 2 classes, but I'll do them both programs at the same time and progress it that way. Because I think what that helped is, if you learn SketchUp and Max at the same time, you'll say, oh, okay, so moving something in Max is like this, and then moving something in in SketchUp is like this. And then if you want to learn Blender, you'll say, I just got to find where the equivalent thing in Blender is.
Yeah.
And you can learn that on your own, right? But if you only know one way to do something, you're never going to be able to adapt the other ways. So I think that learning several packages at the same time is useful, because anytime something new comes up, you'll just make that translation a lot simpler.
Yeah, definitely, man. I think that's a useful way, and it's actually aligned with a growth mindset rather than a fixed one. So
Yeah.
love that. Chris, mate, thank you so much for your time. I've picked up so much things, personally learned a lot of things. So appreciate your time, mate.
Well, thanks so much for having me. It's awesome that we're able to do these podcasts remotely like this. That's great.
Absolutely. That's it for today, everyone. Now it's time to jump on to roshansemanarka.com/podcast and check out the show notes from today's episode. Click on the direct links to check out Chaos Group, VRay, and follow the amazing and extraordinary work that this gentleman is doing, and follow him on Twitter and reach out to him on LinkedIn as well. Get deep into VRay and the future of visualization. Last but not least, click subscribe, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on today's topic, and feel free to share the love with a review as well. So till next time.